For 8 years, the only companion Jebediah Thorne knew was the wind. It was a cruel friend, clawing at the timbers of his isolated homestead, whispering tales of a world he'd fought so hard to forget. Tonight, it was angrier than usual. Jebediah sat at his rough-hewn table, the warmth from his coffee cup doing little to chase the chill from his bones. It was a chill that had settled in long before this storm. For 8 years, no one had come knocking. For 8 years, that was just the way he wanted it. Then, a sound that didn't belong. A sound the storm couldn't quite swallow. It was the steady, rhythmic beat of horses' hooves, cutting through the deluge. Not the frantic scramble of a lost traveler, but something more measured, more purposeful. He moved to the window, his form a silhouette against the flickering lamplight. Through the sheets of rain, he saw them. 7 riders, moving as one. A single organism against the gale. And they were all women. The sight froze the breath in his lungs. Travelers in this godforsaken territory didn't ride like that, hunched against the wind, yes. But these women held a discipline in their posture. Their mounts were strong, thoroughbred stock, not the weary nags of the desperate. The woman at their head dismounted with a fluid grace that defied the weather. Her face, framed by rain-slicked crimson hair, held a striking certainty. She strode towards his porch, her steps sure on the slick, wet wood. But the look in her eyes as they met his through the glass. It wasn't the plea of the lost. It was the appraisal of the hunter. Jebediah felt the old instincts, buried under 8 years of solitude, stirred to life. His hand drifted towards the loaded Winchester hanging over the hearth. A silent extension of his arm. He stopped it mid-air. These weren't highwaymen. But they weren't helpless, either. Mister. We need shelter from the storm. We won't last the night out here. Jebediah remained motionless. A statue carved from suspicion. 7 of them. All armed with a beauty that was its own kind of weapon. He knew what people brought to a man's door, grief and complications. He'd had his fill of both. But his own code, forged in a life he'd left behind, had a cardinal rule: you don't leave anyone to the mercy of a storm. Even if you suspect they're bringing a storm of their own right along with them. Through the thick oak of the door, he could hear them murmuring to one another in low, urgent tones. Not the chatter of weary travelers, but the clipped communication of soldiers before a battle. He knew opening that door was a mistake. A fool's gamble. But not opening it. That was a sin he wasn't willing to commit. His hand closed over the cold, iron latch. And he turned it. The iron latch clicked, and the door swung inward. The storm followed, an unwelcome guest of wind and rain. The woman stood on his threshold. Her crimson hair was plastered to her temples, but the fire in her eyes burned brighter than the gale. My thanks, mister, she said, her voice steady as she stepped inside before he could reconsider. Behind her, 6 others moved past him into the room, bringing the cold night in with them. One by one, they entered. A blonde, barely a woman, with eyes that held the ghosts of old wars. A dark-haired woman whose knuckles were a roadmap of healed-over violence. A third who smiled too easily, her gaze lingering on the lock of his gun cabinet. They did not huddle for warmth. Instead, they spread out, each claiming a corner of the small room, their backs to the walls, their eyes missing nothing. They moved with the quiet efficiency of a wolf pack entering a sheep pen. Jebediah's gaze was hard as winter iron. Where are you headed in a storm like this? The leader removed her soaked coat. The dress beneath it was worn from the trail, but made of a quality that spoke of money. Oregon, she answered, the lie sliding from her tongue like warm honey. Our husbands. They perished in a mining collapse. Left us a small holding near the Willamette Valley. We travel together for protection. The way she said husbands, with a slight, almost imperceptible pause, told Jebediah everything he needed to know. The youngest one, the blonde, spoke up, her voice a nervous flutter. We are so grateful. We haven't seen another living soul for 2 days. A lie. Jebediah had seen the dust of riders that afternoon. Maybe 4 hours behind them. Heavy riders, pushing their horses hard. Someone was on their trail. He moved toward the fire. The coffee's hot. Help yourselves. I'll see to your animals. No, the leader said, too quickly. They're fine. We are quite capable. Another red flag. No traveler on the plains ever refused a hand with their horses in weather like this. Her hand, he noticed, never strayed far from a bulge hidden in the folds of her skirt. He poured the thick, black coffee into tin cups, his movements deliberate. Through the kitchen window, he could see their horses in his barn. Fine animals, but their flanks were slick with sweat and foam, signs of a hard, desperate ride. They were running from something. He turned back to the room and saw the blonde girl tremble. Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to spill over. I can't, she whispered, her voice cracking, directed at her leader. Serafina, I can't do this. Quiet, Lily, the leader commanded, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous hiss. But before the girl could break completely, another sound. Faint at first, then growing stronger, clearer, cutting through the howl of the wind. More horses. A lot of them. Coming fast. Serafina spun toward the window, and for the first time, Jebediah saw her mask of iron control shatter into dust. He saw raw, primal fear. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path, his presence filling the room. Tell me the truth, he demanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Now. Serafina looked from the approaching menace outside to the unmovable object in front of her. She took a breath, and the lie finally died. We aren't widows, she said, her voice flat and cold. And we didn't inherit a thing. The men coming for us. We took their entire payroll right out from under them. The confession hung in the air, heavier than the storm. The approaching hooves were no longer a distant threat, but a rising thunder that shook the very floorboards. Then, the women moved. From beneath their skirts and coats, came the cold, hard gleam of steel. Deringers, skinning knives, and a sawed-off shotgun that appeared as if by magic in the hands of the smiling redhead. They were no longer 7 desperate women. They were a cornered firing squad. But it was too late. The warning was a single, violent crack of splitting wood. The door flew inward, torn from its iron hinges, and crashed against the far wall. The man who filled the doorway was built like an oak tree. Rain streamed from the brim of his black hat, carving clean trails through the grime on his face. His eyes, small and hard as pebbles, swept the room. They settled on Jebediah. A slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. Well, I'll be damned, the man rasped, his voice like grinding stones. Jebediah Thorne. Heard you'd gone to ground out here. Playing farmer? Jebediah's face was a mask of stone. Still chasing scraps for other men? Blackwood. The name hung in the air. Blackwood. A name that meant something in the territories. A name whispered by men who owed dangerous people money, right before they disappeared. Blackwood laughed. A dry, rattling sound. This ain't about scraps, Thorne. These ladies took something that belongs to a very important man. His gaze slid past Jebediah to the women huddled behind him. Hand 'em over. This doesn't have to get bloody. Jebediah didn't flinch. He saw the raw fear in Lily's eyes. He saw the defiant hatred in Serafina's. And he saw the ghosts of all the times he had failed to act, parading behind Blackwood's sneer. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about the man he had decided to be, 8 years ago in the quiet of this valley. Afraid it already is, Jebediah said, his voice quiet, yet it cut through the room. They're under my roof. Your roof? Blackwood scoffed. Your funeral. But Jebediah didn't reach for the Winchester over the hearth. Instead, he took 2 steps to the side. He knelt, his hand finding a loose floorboard near the fireplace, a board no one would ever look at twice. He lifted it. The women gasped. Even Blackwood's men took an involuntary step back. The space beneath was a dark nest of meticulously cared for steel. Not hunting rifles. A repeating carbine, military issue. 2 heavy Colt revolvers in a worn leather rig. Boxes of ammunition stacked with perfect precision. Jebediah lifted the carbine. The click of him checking the action was the loudest sound in the world. He rose to his feet, the weapon resting in his hands as if it were a part of him. You're not just a farmer, Serafina breathed, half in terror, half in awe. Jebediah's eyes never left Blackwood. I was a U.S. Marshal, he said, his voice cold as a grave. Before I decided civilization wasn't worth the trouble. Now, get out of my house. The silence in the room was a living thing, heavy and coiled. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, reassessing the man before him. A marshal, he sneered, a flicker of doubt touching his voice for the first time. I heard you quit after what happened at Red Canyon. Heard you lost your nerve. He was fishing, trying to find a lever. Heard some of the bank's money never found its way back. Neither. Maybe you and these ladies have something in common after all, Thorne? A taste for other people's property. But it was Serafina who moved next. She stepped out from behind Jebediah's protective stance, her small derringer looking like a child's toy in the face of Blackwood's menace. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the tension like a razor. It wasn't a payroll, she said. Every eye in the room turned to her. The money we took. It was payment. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the hard faces of Blackwood's men. Payment for girls. Some of them no older than Lily. Bought and sold like cattle to men with gold in their pockets and rot in their souls. The air went dead. Even Blackwood's thugs shifted on their feet, their certainty wavering. They were killers and thieves. But this was a different kind of darkness. Jebediah's face, which had been a mask of cold fury, now showed something else. A deep, soul-shattering recognition. Red Canyon. The faces of the girls he'd failed to save. The evidence that had vanished. It was all the same beast. And it had followed him here, to his very door. Blackwood licked his lips, his bravado cracking. A pretty story, he snarled. Doesn't change a thing. A job's a job. Even a job paid for in blood. Jebediah asked, his voice barely a whisper. Especially blood, Blackwood shot back. Pays best. That was the final word. But instead of raising the carbine, Jebediah did something that stunned the entire room. He slowly, deliberately, set the weapon down on the table. Blackwood blinked, confused. Serafina's eyes widened. Jebediah reached inside his shirt, into a hidden pocket sewn into the lining. He pulled out a small, tarnished piece of metal. Not the star of a U.S. Marshal. Something else. Something with an eagle and a shield that made Blackwood's blood run cold. You've been a hermit for 8 years, Serafina breathed. No, Jebediah corrected, his eyes locked on Blackwood. I've been on duty. Special Division, Federal Marshal, he stated,
his voice now ringing with an authority that had been buried for nearly a decade. "I've been hunting the men you work for since Red Canyon. This ranch. This life.
It wasn't an escape. It was a trap. And you just walked right into it." For a single, frozen moment, no one moved. Blackwood stared at the federal badge as if it were a rattlesnake poised to strike. The 8 years of Jebediah's quiet life replayed in his mind, not as an escape, but as a meticulously set snare. The hunter had become the prey. That realization broke him. Rage, raw and desperate, flooded his face. His hand clawed for the pistol at his hip. He never cleared the leather. Jebediah hadn't reached for the carbine. He reached for the Colt from the floor cache, the heavy revolver finding his hand like a long-lost limb. The gun bucked once. The shot was a deafening crack that tore the silence to shreds. Blackwood spun. A cry of agony ripped from his throat as the bullet shattered his shoulder, sending his own weapon clattering to the floor. The room exploded. It was a storm of gunpowder and lightning, a whirlwind of righteous fury. Seraphina's derringer barked twice, dropping the man by the door. The dark-haired woman moved like a phantom, her shots finding their marks with chilling precision. The redhead laughed, a wild, terrifying sound as she fired her shotgun, the blast echoing like the wrath of God. Jebediah worked the heavy Colt, each shot a final, damning period at the end of a wicked life. Years of solitude had not dulled the lawman's edge. They had honed it to a razor's sharpness. One last thug, his face a mask of panic, made a final, desperate move. He lunged for Lily, grabbing the terrified girl and pressing a gleaming knife to her throat. "Drop him!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Or she dies." The room froze again. But this time, the fear in Lily's eyes was gone. It had been burned away, replaced by something hard and cold as river stone. She drove her elbow back, hard, into the man's gut. As he gasped, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second, she stomped the heel of her boot down on his instep with all her weight. He howled, his hold breaking. He was exposed. It was the last mistake he ever made. 6 weapons spoke as one. The sound was not a series of shots, but a single, unified roar of judgment. The man was thrown back against the wall and slid to the floor, a testament to the fury of women who had been hunted for the last time. Then, silence. A silence broken only by the ragged gasps for air and the fading rumble of the storm outside. Smoke curled towards the ceiling from hot gun barrels. Blackwood, clutching his ruined shoulder, looked upon the wreckage of his crew. He had walked into a farmer's house to collect a debt. He had found hell waiting for him instead. The sun rose. Its clean, golden light spilled through the shattered door, painting the carnage within an obscene detail. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world washed and new. The storm inside the ranch house had left only ghosts. Blackwood died some time before dawn, his last breath a curse against the farmer who had undone him. His remaining men sat bound and broken, waiting for a justice they had never believed in. It was Lily who spoke first, her voice no longer a frightened whisper, but clear and strong. "The money we took," she said, looking at Jebediah. "What happens to it?" Jebediah met her gaze. "It's evidence now. But what would you like to happen to it?" "There are other girls," Lily said, her voice steady. "Girls who need a safe place to heal. It should go to them. All of it." Jebediah nodded slowly. "I'll see to it." Seraphina stood by the broken doorframe, the smoking derringer now cleaned and hidden away. "And us?" she asked. "We're still thieves? Still killers?" "You're survivors," Jebediah corrected, his voice gentle for the first time. "And you are key witnesses in a federal investigation. The government has ways of making problems and people disappear. As if on cue, riders appeared on the horizon. They rode in an orderly column, their badges glinting in the morning sun. The cleanup crew had arrived. Later, as the women mounted fresh horses brought by the marshals, Serafina approached him one last time. "You could have turned us in from the start. Peace isn't something you find," Jebediah said, looking out at the vast plains that had been his prison for 8 years. "It's something you make. Last night, I chose a side. What about you?" she asked. "Your long watch is over." He looked around his home, stained with blood and gunpowder, forever changed. "I suppose it is," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "Time to find a new mission." He watched them ride away. 7 women, disappearing into the rising sun, towards 7 new lives they had earned with blood and fire. They rode until they were nothing more than specks against the endless sky. Jebediah Thorne, the hermit, the ghost of Red Canyon, stood in his doorway. He had opened his home to a storm and found his own soul in the wreckage. He had learned that sometimes, the only way to fight the darkness is to let a little bit of it in. And sometimes, justice isn't found in a courtroom. It's found on a dusty road, at the end of a long night, leaving the world just a little bit cleaner than it was before.